Good morning from bright, sunny Fort Worth, Texas. I know, I'm not usually in Texas, but today it's a very special edition of Tactical Tips brought to you by the Independent Dealer Podcast. Also, Neo is our sponsor. They're my underwriter. They should be yours. Check them out and do better underwriting so you can sell more cars and make less mistakes when it comes to that. So this week we're going to talk about why should we track all the things that go on our dealership. Track leads especially. No matter if you're a dealership or another company that sells anything, you need to be tracking these things. So we're going to just talk about leads. Number one, what should I track? Okay, so it depends on what you're doing, but number one, in the car business, you track ups. And this is an old school thing. And an up is something that makes your salespeople get out of their chair, and that's the reason it's called an up. So that's the first thing we need to talk about tracking. Two, I like to talk about tracking applications. Applications are super important, especially when you're financing your own deals. Even if you're not financing your own deals and you're doing it outside, if you have applications there, then we know what we're doing and what we aren't doing. Three, you should be tracking your calls that come into your dealership. It's not as important as it used to be, but today it's a lot more, you get a lot more web leads and things like this, but calls are still very important. Next is appointment sets. And you should say, well, why should we worry about that? But if you know what your appointment set is, appointment show ratio, then you know where to work at. The next one, appointment shows, right? Super easy. The last one, everybody's tracking. We're all tracking how many things we sell each month. So make sure you're tracking those things. Very simple, very easy. All right, number two, don't start with tracking too much. If you're tracking nothing right now, just start with ups or just start with applications. Don't make this real hard. If you make it too hard, you'll get confused and it just won't work. So start small, build as you go. The third thing is, how do I track these things? So back in the day, you could hire an old guy to sit in your dealership, and every time somebody drove on it, they'd hit a clicker, right? Today you can do a lot different things with that. You can have a spreadsheet, a CRM, the back end of your website, third parties. You can use all these things to track. And you know what? I'm going to actually put in the newsletter this week is a simple spreadsheet so you can start tracking these things. Make it super easy on you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Once you've tracked these things, you have these numbers, you go, well, what do they mean? That's the biggest thing. That's what we're trying to get to. What do these numbers mean? And what you want to see is you want to start having percentage set to shows, ups to applications, solds to application, calls to applications. All these things, you want to know these percentage. And once you get the percentage, you can look at national averages and tell where do you lie. So, like what you want to know is that if I set 100 appointments this week, I want 50 to show. And that's a 50% show ratio. And then out of that 50%, I want to sell half of those cars. So those are the type of things you want to, get to the bottom of. You get to the bottom of those things, you can sell more cars. The last thing, once you have these numbers, and the fifth thing we have here is, I've got the numbers, I'm tracking everything. Now what to do with them? Well, I use them to train. I can train my sales staff. Hey, you know what? Your closing ratio is not as good. What are the closing statements you're using? Let's work on those. Or actually, you're setting a lot of appointments, but they're not showing. So what's going wrong here? Did we not follow up on our appointments? Did we not make sure they were there? Because those are things you want to make sure that are happening. If you have a lot of ups that are there, you're not selling a lot of cars, then your salespeople are probably not doing anything right. So you might need to fire them. But these are the things you can do once you have that. And the main thing we talked about last week, once you have these numbers, you can adjust your ad spend. It is super important because you want to back into the numbers. Once you have the numbers, you can back into how many cars you want to sell. Again, I've told you this before. If I want to sell 40 cars this month, I know that I'm going to have 200 applications. And if I know how much an application costs me in advertising spend, then I know what I need to spend. If that's $10,000, if that's $5,000, whatever it is, if I know my numbers, and if I'm tracking things properly, tracking my leads properly, I can back into it. Hey, I hope this helps. Look forward to seeing you next week.